Hello, comrades. Today I decided to do a video on why the free market is bad and does nothing but exploit the worker more than he already is and destroys developing nations' chances to become self-sufficient and self-reliant and destroys them in general. But anyway, let's begin by looking at the free market's failure in Chile. Under the dictator Pinochet, who overthrew Latin America's oldest democracy and the democratically elected president and left the Salvador Allende, Pinochet left the country with a 45% poverty rate and was only reduced to 20% in 2000 after the center-left president Eduardo Frei Ruiz-Tagle began a was elected and began focusing on poverty and getting better health care for the Chilean people. Also, in 2012, while a center-right president was in charge, the poverty rate was still at 15% and has been going down slowly under their new center-left president as in office right now. The free market also made massive economic recession under neoliberal free market capitalist Boris Yeltsin, along with other former Warsaw Pact members, with the introduction of the free market. This can be mostly traced back to Boris Yeltsin's radical capitalist reforms during his first term, which included large welfare cuts, austerity programs, and he began implementing free market policies, which of course led to poverty and the GDP dropped by 50% in Yeltsin's first term, and of course the free market's failure under Thatcher in the UK. Thatcher crushed the National Union of Miners when they striked through the bad wages. And this can be seen at the end of the strike, since one of the main reasons the strike stopped was the fact that the workers were struggling to pay for their food. And thousands lost their jobs after the strikes, which can be contributed to the loss of manufacturing jobs under Thatcher and in general in the UK. Along with Arthur Scargill, the man who started the strikes and the general secretary of the National Union of Miners, was called the enemy within by Thatcher. And during the Battle of Orgreave, Thatcher called in riot police with shields and mounted police to crush the National Union of Miners. I will read a few quotes from Arthur Scargill, who was there at the Battle of Orgreave, compared to Thatcher quote one day after the battle, which had 123 non-fatal casualties, and also a death of a union protester, Joe Green, who was picketing and was killed while trying to persuade a truck drivers from delivering fuel to a power station. He was struck by a trailer from a truck. Anyway, here is the quote from Arthur Scargill on Orgreave. We've had riot drills, we have had riot gear, we've had police on horseback charging into our people, we've had people hit with truncheons and people kicked to the ground. The intimidation and brutality that has been displayed is reminiscent of a Latin American state. And here is what Thatcher said about the battle only one day later. What's it called? I must tell you that what we have got is an attempt to substitute the rule of a mob over the law, and it must not succeed. It must not succeed. There are those who are using violence and intimidation to impose their will on others who do not want it. The rule of law must prevail over the mob. Anyway, this is clearly an anti-democratic quote. Not surprised from Thatcher, but an anti-labor union quote. But anyway, let's talk about Margaret Thatcher's economic failures instead of her domestic ones, such as wasting the North Sea oil boom on tax cuts on the rich and military spending. Also, under her rule, poverty was high, unemployment was high as well. Public spending dropped, the wage gap got worse, and of course the unemployment rate was at its peak under Thatcher. 12%, and wages in general got worse. The labor union membership decreased massively. And finally, there's 22%. What's it called? And there's 22% poverty rate. Now let's talk about the quote-unquote free market haven of the city-state of Singapore, whose poverty rate whose poverty rate has increased by 43% in only 3 years, and the wealth gap is widening even more, and it also has affordable housing crisis, and the free market directly ties into the poverty due to the fact that the influx of foreign workers increases even more, and the foreign workers obviously have extremely low wages and bad working conditions, which doesn't help the Singaporean workers and proletariat in general. Anyway, and now I just like to explain why I dislike the concept of free market in general, and using some examples along the way. First off, it prevents third world countries and developing countries in general from becoming self-reliant or having political freedom. We can see some Burkina Faso, although I made a video about this already, and about Thomas Sankara. But to sum it up, the part I like to reference is that he made the country self-sufficient and self-reliant from the neo-imperialist capitalist French. Citations for this are in my video on Burkina Faso. I'd rather not list all of his accomplishments right now, since it's an extremely long list, and it's in the video, like I said. Now, before we move on to compare before and after in Burkina Faso, I'd just like to add that all of the accomplishments that stay in my video were accomplished in just 4 years. While under Blaise Compaoré, the capitalist dictator that was a revisionist and was unconstitutional, took power in a coup in 1987, and he was unconstitutional since he also tried to change the constitution of Burkina Faso to extend his already 27-year term, which led to his overthrow in 2014 in the Burkinabe Revolution, which he was replaced with a socialist president. But like I said earlier, Wolf Leftist goes into more detail about his policies and etc. And the free market also allows corporations to move and set up stores and business in general in countries and other countries. For example, Samsung in America, Apple and Google in Asia, and etc. And so mostly in third world or developing countries, in this influx of foreign massive corporations, this leads to the exporting of even more capitalist exploitation and horrible working conditions and wages. Since the third world doesn't have developed labor laws, and the free market allows these companies to buy out local businesses and, in general, outcompete them, and then they can make them. Then they can make them go out of business because they can't compete. Although a regulated market could help with some of these problems, it would still persist, and there would still be capitalist exploitation. So a complete destruction of the free market would be the most viable solution, in my opinion, and replace it with mutual aid and self-reliance, and in general, just get rid of it. Anyway, hope you guys like the video. All the sources are in the description, like always, and my Twitter. Anyway, bye.